Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for another Tween Storytime with AHMFL. Today we are going to be reading chapters 8 and 9 of Elizabeth Winthrop's book, The Castle in the Attic. In our story so far, William, our main character, is upset because his caretaker Mrs. Phillips is returning to England after living with his family for 10 years. So William is desperately trying to find a way to stop Mrs. Phillips from leaving. As a goodbye present, she gives him the castle that has been in her family for years. And along with the castle comes a special surprise. It is the Silver Knight that magically awakens for William. The Silver Knight, Sir Simon, is in possession of a magical token that can shrink living things. And at the end of chapter 7, we finish with William using the token to shrink Mrs. Phillips in the hope that she won't leave. So how do you think Mrs. Phillips took being shrunken? Is she excited to stay? Is she incredibly angry at William? I think I would be. Let's see her reaction in chapter 8. The Castle in the Attic. Chapter 8. William walked slowly through the house up to the attic. It would probably take Mrs. Phillips a while to get used to her new arrangement, and he wasn't quite ready to face her. He could barely hear the rise and fall of small voices inside the belt pack. He hoped Sir Simon was doing a good job of explaining the situation to her. He sat down on the top step and waited. The knight was the first to stick his head out. "Where are we?" he asked. "Back in the attic," William replied. He put his hand down, palm outstretched, and Sir Simon scrambled onto it. Then the knight turned to help Mrs. Phillips. "Come, my lady," he called into the darkness of the belt pack. "No need to be afraid. Young William has a remarkably steady hand." Looking down, William saw her emerge slowly. First the top of her head, the straight white hair rumpled from the trip, then her small arms, still holding her blue raincoat, and finally her small feet in their practical brown walking shoes. Although she'd only known Sir Simon for one short, bumpy ride, she seemed to trust him already. She allowed him to steady her and nodded wearily when he asked her a question in a low voice. "Hold still!" the knight snapped at William. "I understand that you explained nothing at all to her. She is quite shaken. I am going in for her suitcase." "I'm holding as still as I can," William muttered. While the small knight fished around for her case, his legs tickling William's palm, she stood without moving or turning around. William looked down at her, but he didn't call out. Small as she was now, she was still Mrs. Phillips, and he could see she was disappointed by the curve of her shoulders. Sir Simon inched his way back onto the platform of William's hand, pulling the suitcase behind him. "Let's go to the castle, William. I would like to show the Lady Eleanor her accommodations." "She already knows where they are," William said, smiling at the knight, who seemed to have lost 10 years in an hour. "Ah, but not from the inside," the knight replied. William lowered the drawbridge and lifted the portcullis for them. Sir Simon helped his companion off William's hand and escorted her across the wooden planks of the bridge, talking and gesturing all the while. When they disappeared around the corner of the outer wall, William lay down on his stomach and waited for them by the entrance. They reappeared from time to time, now at the door of the chapel, now in front of the tower. When he saw them head across the courtyard to the kitchen, he lifted the roof off the second floor and watched them come out from the staircase into the master chamber. Mrs. Phillips leaned her head close to the knight's, listening intently to all he had to say. She seemed at home with Sir Simon, which William knew should make him happy, but it didn't. It made him feel oddly lonely. He sat up so that his face was the right height and distance from theirs. "Do you like it, Mrs. Phillips?" he asked when he saw that the knight had come at last to the end of a sentence. She stared at him. It was the look of one person trying to recognize another after a long separation. Then she whispered something to Sir Simon and walked off to the other corner of the room. "William, my lady says that she will not speak to you until you return her to her normal size." "But Sir Simon, have you told her we can't do that?" William whispered. The knight put up both his hands as if to warn William off. "There cannot be too many shocks for her at one time," he said quietly. She thinks this is just temporary and seems resigned to this situation for the moment. Any further revelations would be most unwise right now. I shall make her some dinner and see that she is settled comfortably. He started to move away. Wait, Sir Simon, William said. Tell her... He stopped. Tell her I did it because I couldn't stand to have her leave. I'm sure she'll speak to me then. He watched the knight escort Mrs. Phillips toward the tower door, hoping that she'd turn and wave goodbye to him. But of course, she didn't. When Mrs. Phillips made up her mind about something, she rarely changed it. William switched on the small night lamp next to the castle and went downstairs. He wandered through the house, which was darkening quickly with the setting sun. He stopped at the door of Mrs. Phillips' room. It felt empty, although the smell of her lavender soap lingered in the air. He sat in her chair and looked out her window for a long time, watching the swallows swoop and dip over the lawn in the last even light of day. "Remember, she isn't gone!" he cried out suddenly. "I've still got her with me, upstairs!" "William, is that you?" a voice called from the end of the hall. William jumped up. "Dad?" His father met him at the door. "It's me. I came home a little early." "Has she left?" he asked. "Yes," William said. He pushed past his father. "Let's go downstairs. It's too dark and creepy up here." They cooked their favorite meal for dinner that night. William pressed out the waffles with the old black iron, and his father stirred chopped green peppers and Tabasco sauce into an omelet. It was an odd combination of tastes, but over the years they had gotten used to it. "Was it hard when Mrs. Phillips left?" his father asked as they sat together at the kitchen table. William nodded. He pretended to concentrate on the maple syrup, filling each separate waffle square before he went on to the next. "I'm going to try and get home earlier on the nights your mother has evening hours, so we can eat dinner together. We'll have to expand our repertoire, though," he said with a smile. "Well, we still have our pot roast with currant jelly," William reminded him. "And our chicken soup with bacon bits, but those things take a long time." "What are you thinking about, Dad?" William asked. "You've got that funny look on your face." "I thought we'd try Chinese." "Chinese?" His father handed William a package from under the table. "It's an early birthday, late goodbye Mrs. Phillips present from me. Go ahead and open it." It was a funny-shaped metal bowl with a Chinese cookbook and 2 sets of chopsticks inside. William laughed. "Most fathers give their sons footballs." His father frowned. "Well, I'm not most fathers, and you're not most sons. It's a wok, a special pan for stir-frying Chinese food. We can pick out recipes the night before, and I'll buy the food on the way home from the office." "You won't forget?" William asked. The question was a fair one. His father was easily distracted. "You can call and remind me." "All right, it's a deal." William started leafing through the book. "For Thursday night, let's do beef and broccoli." They washed the dishes and put them away. William spread his homework out on the big table in the living room and worked to the blare of Vivaldi's trumpets. His father loved music. Whenever he was in the house, there was music playing in all the rooms on the elaborate speaker system he'd installed himself. "I've been meaning to get to the attic and measure the castle so I can make the moat," his father said as William headed up the stairs to bed. "That's all right, Dad," William said nervously. Mrs. Phillips and the Silver Knight would have no warning. "The castle doesn't really need a moat." "You just think I'm going to give up on this project the way I have on some others." "I don't mind, Dad. I know how busy you are with everything." His father smiled and went back to reading the newspaper without another word. William got into bed without checking on the lord and lady in the attic. He pretended he did not want to wake them, but he knew underneath he could not face her disapproval again. "I'm sure she'll change her mind tomorrow," he said out loud to nobody. Finally, he fell asleep with the solid lump of his old bear pushed comfortingly against the lump in his stomach. Chapter 9. But she didn't change her mind the next day, or the one after that. By Thursday, William had come to dread his afternoon trip to the attic. "How is she?" he'd asked the Silver Knight, who came up to the upper wall walk at the sound of his footsteps. "The same," was his inevitable reply. "She is not eating well, and I can hear her pacing long into the night." William tried everything. In the early morning, he brought her breakfast, small bits of toast sprinkled with butter and Marmite. In the afternoon, when he got home from school, he brought her hot tea. He allowed Sir Simon to light a fire in the fireplace in her bedroom, even though he was worried that the whole castle might go up in flames. He cut curtains for her narrow windows out of some red velvet material from his mother's sewing closet and gave the knight some English postage stamps to paste on her wall. But nothing seemed to work. He had not even seen her since the first day he brought her to the attic. One afternoon, Sir Simon reported that the giant had been up to visit. "Which one?" William asked. "The one you call Dad. He walked all around the castle and then knelt down and spread some ribbon from one corner to the other. Most peculiar behavior. I was watching him through the arrow loop in the wardrobe." "That was my father. He said he wanted to build a moat for the castle. I wonder if he's really going to do it. Did he see you or Mrs. Phillips?" "No, he was not here long. I think she considered calling to him for help, but I persuaded her it would be of no use. The only thing that can restore her to her normal size is the other half of the token." "If she'd only let me explain," William said for the 100th time. "She told me last night that she will not come out of her room until you come in and get her," the knight said slowly. "But she knows I can't do that," William cried. "I'm too big." There was a brief silence. "I think that's what she means, William," the knight said. "She wants me to be small too?" "She wants you to see how it feels." "But how would I ever get big again? I'd be trapped in there." Even as he said the words, he knew what the knight was thinking. That was exactly what he had done to Mrs. Phillips. "You were part of it too, Sir Simon. It wasn't just my idea." "We were both too hasty. She was made small against her will, William. There's no changing that now. Every day she spends here, she loses time in her own world. But I have an idea. Meet me by the drawbridge." William lay down on the floor near the front entranceway to the castle. Slowly the drawbridge was lowered. Sir Simon walked out to the end of the bridge. Then he turned and pointed up to the riddle written above the castle doors. Once again, William read it. "When the lady doth ply her needle, and the lord his sword doth test, then the squire shall cross the drawbridge, and the time will be right for a quest." "So what?" he said. "We have the lord and we have the lady. We are only missing the squire," Sir Simon said. "Think about it, William." Without another word, he went back inside and raised the drawbridge for the night. The next day, William waited for Jason after school. He needed desperately to talk to somebody. Jason looked surprised to see him. "Want to bike into town?" William suggested cautiously. "I have to get some food for dinner." "Sure, I don't have anything better to do." They pulled their bikes out of the rack and headed out to the main road. "How's the castle?" Jason asked, drawing up alongside. "Okay. Mrs. Phillips left last week. She said to say goodbye to you. I didn't think she was going that quickly." The traffic was bad, and the two of them had to concentrate on steering for the rest of the ride into town. Jason did seem a bit surprised when William led him through the grocery store to the vegetable section along the rear wall. "Ginger, broccoli, soy sauce? That's it. We've got the flank steak at home." "What's the deal?" Jason asked. "My father and I are cooking Chinese the nights that Mom works late. Want to have dinner with us tonight?" Jason shook his head. "I'll let you practice for a couple more weeks," he said with a grin. "Want to come back with me now?" "Sure." William was glad he didn't have to talk about his problems right there on the sidewalk. When they got home, he walked through the house, turning on the lights. "I always do that first when I get home," William explained. Jason nodded. "Must be weird coming home to an empty house after all the years of Mrs. Phillips being here. Kind of neat, too. I wish my mother wasn't always hanging around asking about my day at school." They settled down at the kitchen table with 2 big bowls of cold cereal. "Jason, what if you had a friend who really needed your help, but you couldn't help him unless you changed yourself?" said William. "What do you mean?" "Well, pretend somebody was beating me up and your glasses got knocked off and you couldn't find them. Would you try to do something anyway?" "Sure, but I wouldn't be much help." "But would you try and fight the guy off anyway?" William asked. "Well, I wouldn't go away and leave you if you were in trouble like that." "That's what I thought you'd say." "What's this all about?" Jason asked. William wanted to tell him everything, all about the castle and the Silver Knight and what he'd done to Mrs. Phillips. He knew that Jason would not laugh at him, but he also knew that keeping the secret to himself was part of what he had to go through. He'd gotten himself into this mess, and he had to get himself out. "I'm doing a story for English class, and I'm not sure how it's going to end," he said. It was a lame excuse, but Jason didn't question him further. "Maybe when it's all over, I can tell Jason about it," William thought later that night. "When I come back. If I come back." He sat up in bed. "If I'm talking about coming back, I must have decided to go," he said to the empty room. William kept his decision to himself for a couple of days. His visits to the attic were brief and businesslike. He ignored the meaningful looks from the night and his hints that Mrs. Phillips' health was deteriorating. On Sunday afternoon, when William came in from a special gymnastics practice, his father called him down to his workroom in the cellar. Sitting on the cement floor was a wooden platform, which was surrounded by a separate wooden rectangle. "Do you like it?" William's father asked. "What is it?" "The platform is for the castle. The outer frame is a wall, so that when you let down the drawbridge, it can rest right here." His father pointed to a notch in the outer wall. "The tunnel in between them is the moat. You take the wall," he said, lifting up the platform. "Dad, where are you going?" William called. "Up to the attic." His father's voice floated back to him from the top of the cellar steps. William picked up the rectangular wall and hurried after him. How was he going to get up there in time to warn Sir Simon? "Dad, wait, let me go first," he called, but his father was already on the second floor. "I can't stop now, William. This thing is heavy," he shouted back. And before William could say anything more, he heard the tramp of his father's shoes on the attic steps. By the time he got upstairs, his father had settled the platform down next to the castle. "It smells like smoke up here. I noticed it the other day when I came up to measure the castle," Mr. Lawrence said. "Do you smell it?" "No," William said quickly. "It's always this way. I'll pick up the castle and you slip the platform under." "It's too big for you to lift alone," his father said. "We'll each lift one side and push the platform under with our feet. Ready? Heave-ho!" William lifted his side of the castle very carefully, trying to keep even with his father. Looking down from above, he could see the terrified face of the Silver Knight staring up at him from behind the stable door. Mrs. Phillips was probably in her bedchamber, safely hidden under the roof. They had disturbed Sir Simon's dinner. His plate spilled off the table and rolled across the courtyard while they were pushing the platform into place with their feet. "All right, let her down, William. There, that's perfect." Mr. Lawrence lowered the outer wall over the castle. "Drop the drawbridge and we'll see how it fits." The drawbridge settled easily into the notch in the wood. "That's terrific, Dad!" William was trying desperately to lure his father back down the steps, but he was pacing around the castle, sniffing the air. "Odd smell. I don't remember it before. I'd better have a smoke alarm installed up here. Oh, one more part. I have it in my pocket." Mr. Lawrence pulled out a triangular wedge of wood and connected it to the end of the drawbridge. "Now the returning victorious army can get up the ramp." William stopped worrying about Mrs. Phillips and Sir Simon for a moment. He sat down on the top step and looked up at his father. "Dad, that's the first time you've ever finished a project for me." "Is it really?" his father said. "Remember the treehouse that we half built together? And the dog kennel? Well, that wasn't your fault." They both smiled. They'd gotten halfway through the kennel one weekend. When William proudly showed it to Mrs. Phillips on Monday afternoon, she told him she was allergic to dogs. "And the bookshelves in the cellar," his father added a bit sheepishly. "Never mind, I finished this one." "That's right. You finished this one and it's great. Just what my castle needed." William stood up. "Better lift the drawbridge for the night," his father said, leaning over the castle again. "Where is that lever?" "Oh, here it is." "Please nobody move," William prayed. The drawbridge seemed to take forever, but at last it was in place. "It's a very special castle, isn't it?" his father said, looking down on it. "I almost feel as if it's magic in some way." "It is," William said. His father didn't ask him to explain. He rested his arm on William's shoulders. "Nice legacy for Mrs. Phillips to leave," he said, "as if her spirit still lives on in the attic." William had a funny feeling in his chest. He knew if he tried to say anything, he would start to cry. They stood there a moment longer without speaking. When William finally sneaked up later to see if the Lord and Lady were all right, Sir Simon was pacing back and forth along the wall walk. "Imagine how you would feel, my boy, if you were sitting down to a nice meal of roasted mouse legs, and your entire castle were lifted up and banged about like a mere piece of kindling. I doubt you would take it too kindly. I barely had time to gain the safety of the stable. And Lady Eleanor is not herself at all this evening. She has gone to bed early." "I said I was sorry, Sir Simon. I had no idea my father was coming up here. You have to admit it's a pretty nice moat and ramp he made." "A useful contraption, I dare say." After apologizing a few more times and rearranging the disturbed furniture, William started downstairs. Halfway, he remembered something and came back. The knight was still standing on the wall walk. "Sir Simon, tell me again about the token. If the person wants to be made small, then time isn't taken away from him, is it?" "No, the person would return to his world at the same moment he left." The knight looked at William with a strange expression, but he didn't ask any questions. "Okay, thanks," William said. Their words hung in the air for a moment while neither one moved. William wanted Sir Simon to promise him that if he joined them, he would be sure to come back again. But he knew it was a promise nobody could make to him. "Good night, William," Sir Simon said at last. "Sleep well." "Good night." He had decided he would join them at 4:15 the next afternoon, 1 week from the moment Mrs. Phillips had been standing on that flagstone looking up at him. He went upstairs right after dinner to pack. When he'd finally assembled everything on the bed, it looked like a very odd assortment. 1 recorder, 1 bear, 1 box of candles, 1 toothbrush, 1 jar of Marmite, as a peace offering to Mrs. Phillips, 1 bag of tea bags, 4 loaves of bread, 2 bottles of water, 1 pair of hiking boots, 1 large box of matches, 1 pair of binoculars, and a change of clothing. He stuffed everything into a backpack and went to bed. His mother came up to kiss him goodnight. She had been on call all weekend, which meant he had barely seen her. She leaned against the headboard with her arm along the back of his pillow. They often took this time to talk at the end of the day. "Where's Bear? He's usually in on these conversations." "Down at the bottom of the bed. He's cold," William sighed. Another lie. "I hear your father gave you the contraption he made for your castle." "Yes, it's neat." "How did the practice go this afternoon?" "All right, I guess. I'm having trouble with the last part of my floor routine. I haven't been able to do it correctly since Mrs. Phillips left." His mother shifted position to look at him. "I know this week must have been hard for you, adjusting to Mrs. Phillips being gone." William looked at his hands. How much easier it would be if that was all he had to adjust to. "I'm tired, Mom. Big day tomorrow." "All right," she said. "Good night." When she hugged him, he held on to her a moment longer than usual. "You're a great hugger, William," she said as she let him go. The next day, William tried hard to concentrate on his classes so he wouldn't think about what was going to happen to him that afternoon. When he said goodbye to Jason at the end of the day, his friend frowned at him. "You look kind of funny," Jason said. "You feel all right?" William nodded. "I guess so. See you." When he looked back from the corner, Jason was still standing there, his bike leaning against his hip, staring after him. "Sir Simon," William called softly from the top of the attic steps. The knight appeared in their customary meeting spot on the wall walk near the south tower. He looked a little weary. "Good afternoon, William." "Have you got the token? I'm ready to come." The knight looked startled. "Ready?" "Yes. See, I've brought my backpack. I hope I thought of everything." "But this is wonderful news, William. I must go tell Lady Eleanor at once." "Sir Simon." William put his index finger across the tower door, bringing the small man up short. "Please don't say anything to her. Please just work the magic quickly before I change my mind. I want to do what she asked. I want to go and see her myself." The small man turned with a new look in his eye. William liked to think it was respect. "Yes, of course, I understand." He reached into his belt pouch. "I'll meet you at the Drawbridge." "Why there?" William asked. The knight smiled up at him. "At your size, from where you're standing, you can reach the Drawbridge with 1 step. But when you're small, it will take considerably longer." The knight disappeared into the south tower to take the stairs. William went and stood at the front entrance of the castle to wait for him. Why couldn't he take back what he'd done to Mrs. Phillips? Then she'd go on her way to England, and the Silver Knight could go on his mad quest by himself. The knight waved up at him from his position by the lever of the drawbridge. When William saw the token held out between the small man's extended hands, he closed his eyes. The hair on his forehead lifted a little in a sudden breeze. "Do it, Sir Simon! I can't wait forever!" he cried. "It's done," the voice called in reply. William opened his eyes. He was looking up at the gray walls of the castle. He could see the rough lines of mortar between each square stone, the intricate carvings on either side of the doorway, the chiseled letters of the motto above. Slowly the drawbridge lowered, a foot at a time. William stood watching as the thick planks came down toward him and settled with a thump into the notch of the outer wall. He walked up the ramp his father had made and waited. The bar slid away from its place, and slowly the double doors were opened. Sir Simon appeared at the entrance, his arms outstretched. "Enter, young William," was all he said. Okay, so at the end of chapter 9, we are a little over halfway through the book The Castle in the Attic. But because this summer is all about experiencing new stories and having new adventures, we're actually going to be starting a different book next week. So this is a fantastic story that you can continue on your own. Again, we've been reading chapters 1 to 9 of The Castle in the Attic by Elizabeth Winthrop. Check it out at the library yourself to finish chapters 10 through 17, as William goes on his quest with Simon the Silver Knight and Mrs. Phillips. This week, we're going to go ahead and give you our secret code for the summer reading program. So our secret code is QUEST. QUEST, quest, just like the quest that William is going to be going on. Make sure that you enter the secret code QUEST in your summer reading account at reading.ahmfl.org to get 30 bonus points toward our summer reading program total that will help you win some really cool prize baskets. And don't forget to join us next week as we start a new book for tweens. Also, when you join us next week, we are going to be moving. Our Kids Storytime and Tween Storytime are going to be delivered exclusively on our YouTube channel through the month of July. So you can find our new episodes plus playlists with our old episodes continuing older stories on our YouTube channel. Just search for Alexander Hamilton Memorial Free Library. Thanks for joining us today for another episode of Tween Storytime. See you next week.